Angela Harris woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her small farmhouse. It was a warm summer morning, and the sun had just begun to rise over the quiet countryside. A soft orange glow filled the sky, and a gentle breeze moved through the open window, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass. Angela sat up slowly, stretched her arms, and took a deep breath. Another long day of work was waiting for her. For Angela, mornings always started early. By 6 o'clock, she was already outside, wearing an old straw hat to protect her from the sun and holding her trusted wooden shovel. She had been taking care of her vegetable field for years, planting and growing everything herself from tomatoes and peppers to cucumbers and corn. Farming wasn't easy, but it gave her peace. Her field stretched out behind the house, a wide patch of green surrounded by tall oak trees. The soil was soft from last night's rain, and the earthy smell reminded her of childhood summers when she used to help her grandmother in a similar garden. As she walked through the rows of vegetables, she brushed her hands over the leaves, feeling the rough texture and cool morning dew. Angela had always loved this quiet life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Every seed she planted, every fruit she harvested, it all came from her hard work. She had 2 children to take care of, and everything she did was for them. Her son, Malik, was 12, and her daughter, Jasmine, was only 8. They were still asleep inside the house, and Angela wanted to finish as much work as she could before they woke up. She dug her shovel into the soil, turning it over slowly, humming softly to herself. The air was warm but fresh, and the morning sun made the field look golden. For a while, everything was peaceful. She felt calm and focused, letting her thoughts drift as she worked. Then she heard the distant sound of a car engine rumbling along the dirt road. The sun was slowly sinking behind the tall oak trees, casting long shadows over Angela's field. The soft golden light stretched across the rows of vegetables, turning the leaves into shades of warm amber and deep green. The air had grown cooler, but inside Angela's chest, the uneasiness she had beta headlights grew brighter as the white police cruiser rolled slowly down the dirt road. Angela stood on her porch, her hand resting on the wooden railing, feeling her heart beat faster with every passing second. The cool night breeze brushed against her skin, but it did little to calm her racing thoughts. For a moment, she considered going inside and locking the door, but something inside her told her to stay. Whatever was happening, she needed to face it directly. The car stopped at the same spot as before, right where the road met the edge of her property. The engine went silent, and the sound of crickets filled the night air. Angela watched closely as the officer stepped out once again, his posture calm but firm. The moonlight reflected off his uniform, casting soft shadows across the gravel. This time, he didn't immediately approach. Instead, he stood still for a few moments, as if taking in the silence around them. Angela's grip tightened on the porch railing. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice before she spoke. "Officer," she called softly, "it's late. Is everything all right?" He finally stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the dirt. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his tone lower than before, "I didn't mean to disturb you again, but there's something I think you should know." Angela straightened, her pulse quickening. "Go on," she said carefully. He stopped at the bottom of her porch steps, looking directly at her. For the first time since he'd appeared earlier that day, his expression wasn't unreadable. There was a seriousness in his eyes now, something he'd been holding back. "We've had reports," he began slowly, "about strange activity in this area over the past week. People walking through properties late at night. Unmarked vehicles passing by and stopping near homes. Nothing's confirmed yet, but I want you to stay cautious." Angela swallowed, her hand tightening on the railing. "Strange activity," she repeated softly. He nodded. "I can't give details yet, we're still looking into it. But I came back tonight because someone reported seeing a vehicle parked near these woods earlier. He pointed toward the line of tall oak trees behind her field. It could be nothing, he added quickly, but I'd rather you be careful. Angela turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning the shadows near the tree line. Everything looked calm, but the idea that someone might have been watching her land sent a chill down her spine. Have you seen anyone unusual around? The officer asked gently. She shook her head. No, she said softly. I've been out here all day, and I didn't notice anything like that. He nodded thoughtfully, his gaze shifting briefly toward the house. Your kids are inside. Yes, Angela said, her voice steady but quiet. They're asleep. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves as the night wind moved through the trees. Angela hesitated before speaking again. If you're saying there's something to be worried about, why not just tell me everything? The officer sighed quietly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Because I don't want to scare you unless there's a reason to be scared, he admitted. But trust me, if anything seems unusual, call us immediately. Angela nodded slowly, taking in his words. All right, she said softly. I will. He gave her a small, reassuring nod before stepping back toward his cruiser. As he opened the door, he paused and turned slightly. And Angela, he said gently, lock your doors tonight. She nodded again, watching as he got into the car and drove away down the dirt road, the red tail lights disappearing into the darkness. Angela stood on the porch for several moments, letting the silence wash over her. The cool night air carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly. She finally turned and went inside, locking the door carefully behind her. She checked the windows one by one, making sure every latch was secure. In the living room, the soft sound of the old clock ticking filled the air, steady and calm, even though her thoughts were racing. Angela peeked into the children's room and smiled faintly when she saw Malik and Jasmine sleeping peacefully. Their soft breathing was the most comforting sound she'd heard all day. She went back to the living room and sat by the window, pulling the curtain just slightly to keep watch over the road. The moon hung high above the fields, bathing everything in pale silver light. Minutes stretched into hours. The quiet night seemed endless, but Angela stayed alert, her gaze shifting between the woods, the road, and the edge of her property. Every time the wind rustled through the trees, her heart skipped a beat. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. It wasn't fear exactly, it was awareness. Her grandmother used to call it the stillness before something happens. Around midnight, Angela finally allowed herself to breathe easier. The road was quiet, the woods were still, and nothing unusual had happened since the officer left. Maybe it really had been just a false alarm. But just as she began to relax, a soft sound caught her attention, the faint crunch of leaves coming from somewhere near the tree line. Angela sat up straighter, her breath catching. She leaned closer to the window, narrowing her eyes at the dark outline of the woods. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, like footsteps moving carefully over dry leaves. She reached over and turned off the lamp, letting the room fall into darkness so she could see outside more clearly. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then, she noticed a subtle movement in the shadows, right near the edge of her field. Angela's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She thought about the officer's warning, his repeated advice to stay alert. Quietly, she stood and stepped away from the window, moving silently through the house to check that the doors and windows were secure again. She returned to the living room, standing near the window without drawing the curtain. She kept her eyes fixed on the field, watching closely. The shadows shifted slightly as the breeze moved through the branches. For a moment, she thought she saw the faint glimmer of something metallic, but then, just as quickly, it disappeared. Angela stayed there for what felt like an hour, watching and listening. Slowly, the quiet returned, and the sounds of the night settled into their usual rhythm. By 2 o'clock, her eyelids grew heavy, but she didn't leave her post by the window. She wouldn't rest until she was certain everything was safe. When the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon, Angela finally let out a long, steady breath. The strange unease that had haunted her since morning hadn't fully faded, but she felt stronger somehow, more certain, more prepared. She whispered softly to herself, "Stay alert. Always." That morning, as the sun rose over the field, Angela brewed coffee and watched the golden light spill across the land she had worked so hard to build. The rows of vegetables glistened with morning dew, and for a moment, the world looked peaceful again. Her children came running into the kitchen, their laughter filling the house, and Angela smiled, hugging them tightly. She knew life wouldn't always be simple or predictable. She knew challenges would come sometimes without warning. But she also knew one thing for sure: she was ready. Angela glanced once more toward the distant treeline, her gaze steady and calm. Whatever the future held, she would face it not with fear, but with strength, patience, and determination. And this time, she would never let her guard down. And feeling all day hadn't faded, it had only grown stronger. It had been several hours since the officer left for the second time, but his words kept replaying in her mind: "You should always stay alert." She leaned on her shovel, staring at the edge of the property where the dirt road curved out of sight. She wanted to believe the visits were just routine checks, but something deep inside told her otherwise. Angela knew one thing for sure: she couldn't let fear control her. Her children depended on her, and this land was everything she had built with her own hands. If there was something she needed to prepare for, then she would. As she stood there lost in thought, Malik came running from the house, his sneakers kicking up tiny clouds of dust. "Mom," he called, slightly out of breath. "Dinner's ready." Jasmine helped set the table. Angela turned to him with a gentle smile, brushing dirt from her palms. "All right, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'll be right there." Together, they walked back to the small farmhouse, its porch glowing in the warm evening light. Inside, the scent of cornbread filled the air, mixing with the faint aroma of roasted vegetables. Jasmine sat at the table, swinging her legs happily while setting down plates. Angela paused for a moment, watching her children, letting the simple sight ease her heart. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. "Mom," Jasmine asked curiously as Angela sat down, "is that man from earlier coming back?" Angela hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "I don't know, baby," she said softly. "But if he does, everything will be all right." Malik looked up from his plate. "You didn't look happy when he came," he said, his young voice gentle but serious. Angela reached over, resting a hand on his. "Sometimes grown ups have to deal with things they don't understand right away," she explained calmly. "But you don't need to worry about it. I've got everything handled." They nodded, trusting her completely, and for the rest of dinner, Angela made sure to keep the conversation light. After the meal, as the children cleared the table, Angela stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the cool evening air. The sky was painted with soft pink and purple streaks, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle faintly. The world looked peaceful, but she couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching her. She scanned the quiet road, the still field, and the tall trees swaying gently in the wind. Everything looked calm, yet her instincts whispered otherwise. Angela reminded herself of her grandmother's old advice: "Pay attention to what doesn't feel right, even if you can't see it." As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard a distant hum. At first, she thought it was the soft sound of insects in the warm night air, but slowly, it grew louder: the steady rhythm of an engine. Her eyes shifted toward the road, and there it was again, the same white police cruiser. Angela's breath caught for a moment. The car moved slowly, its headlights washing over the road in pale yellow beams. It stopped in the same place as before, just at the edge of her property. She stayed still, her hand resting lightly on the porch railing, watching quietly as the officer stepped out once more. This time, his posture was different, more deliberate, more focused. Angela straightened her shoulders, preparing herself. She wouldn't let fear show, not now. "Evening, officer," she called gently as he approached, keeping her tone polite. "Back again?" He nodded, his face partially hidden under the brim of his hat. "Just checking in," he said. She glanced at the sky, where the last light of day was fading into deep blue. "It's late for a routine check," she said softly. He didn't respond to that, his gaze scanning the house, the field, and the narrow road leading into the woods. Angela waited patiently, letting the silence stretch between them. She had learned long ago that sometimes quiet spoke louder than words. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've got a nice place here," he said, his voice steady but unreadable. "Thank you," Angela replied softly. "I've worked hard for it." He nodded slightly, his eyes still shifting from the house to the field, like someone carefully taking note of every detail. Angela decided to ask the question that had been on her mind all day. "Officer," she began gently, "if there's something I should know, I'd rather you tell me." He turned his head slowly to meet her gaze. For a moment, she thought he might answer, but instead, he said, "Just stay alert. Keep your eyes open." With that, he gave a short nod, turned back to his cruiser, and drove away without another word. Angela stood there on the porch, watching the tail lights disappear down the dirt road. Her fingers tightened around the railing as her mind raced. Why had he come back so many times? Why did he keep repeating the same warning without explaining? The night settled in fully now, the air cooler, carrying the chirping of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Angela stepped back inside and locked the door. She moved through the house, checking every window and latch carefully. Malik and Jasmine were in the living room, building a tower of blocks on the carpet, their laughter filling the air. She smiled faintly, grateful for their innocence, but she couldn't let her guard down. After putting the children to bed, Angela sat by the window in the living room, the lights dimmed, staring out at the road. The moonlight painted silver streaks across the field, and shadows stretched long and deep. Every few minutes, she thought she heard something: the rustle of leaves, a soft crunch in the dirt, or the faint hum of a car in the distance. But each time she looked, there was nothing. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, marking the slow passing of time. Hours went by like this. Sometime after midnight, Angela finally stood, deciding to check the porch one last time before resting. She opened the door and stepped outside, letting the cool night air wash over her. The silence was deep, almost too deep. Her eyes scanned the road, the field, and the trees beyond. Everything was still, yet something about the quiet made her skin prickle. Angela told herself to stay calm. She turned back toward the house, but just as she reached for the door handle, she heard it again faintly, in the distance. The low rumble of an engine. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned, watching as headlights appeared far down the road, slowly growing brighter. The same white police cruiser was returning. But this time, Angela felt it in her bones: tonight was different. Angela stopped and looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead. It wasn't honest. Angela stayed in her field long after the police cruiser disappeared down the dirt road. The soft sound of the engine fading into the distance should have calmed her, but it didn't. Instead, an uneasy silence settled around her, heavier than before. The sun was climbing higher, warming the ground beneath her boots, but she felt a cold shiver run through her anyway. She took a deep breath and leaned on her shovel, trying to shake off the feeling. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe the officer really was just doing his job. But deep down, her instincts told her something else, something she couldn't explain. Angela tried to focus on her work, forcing herself to return to the rows of vegetables. She dug the shovel into the soil, turned it over, and planted seeds one by one. Normally, She loved the rhythm of gardening, the way her hands worked with the earth, the way the wind brushed against her face, the way the smell of damp soil always reminded her of her grandmother's stories about resilience and patience. But today, she couldn't settle her mind. Every small sound around her made her look up: the rustling leaves, the soft buzzing of bees, even the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and glanced at the house. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jasmine sitting at the table, swinging her legs and eating her breakfast, while Malik leaned against the counter, reading one of his comic books. Seeing them safe brought her comfort, but it also strengthened her determination. No matter what, she had to protect her children, her home, and the life she had built. Angela returned her focus to the field, but a strange feeling crept over her, like she wasn't entirely alone. She paused and straightened up, scanning the edge of the property. The tall oak trees cast long shadows, and the breeze made the branches sway gently. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual, but then she caught a faint glimmer in the distance, near the narrow path leading to the woods. It was gone in a second, but it made her uneasy. Maybe it was sunlight reflecting off something, or maybe someone was out there. She shook her head and muttered to herself, "Get a hold of yourself, Angela." Still, she couldn't ignore her instincts. She set the shovel aside and walked slowly toward the edge of the field, her boots crunching softly on the dry soil. Her eyes scanned the tree line carefully, but she didn't see anyone. Everything looked still and calm, as though nothing had happened. But the feeling didn't leave her. Taking a deep breath, she turned back and returned to her work, telling herself not to let fear take over. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high into the sky. By noon, the air was hot and heavy, and Angela finally decided to take a short break. She walked to the porch, poured herself a glass of cold water, and sat down on the wooden steps. From here, she could see the entire stretch of her field, the dusty road, and the edge of the woods beyond. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Malik came outside holding his comic book and sat next to her. "Mom, who was that man earlier?" he asked softly. Angela hesitated before answering. "Just an officer," she said gently. "He was checking on something." "Did something happen?" Malik's brows furrowed, concern showing on his young face. "No, sweetheart," Angela said with a small smile, brushing a hand over his curls. "Everything's fine." He nodded but didn't look convinced. He sat close to her, leaning his head against her shoulder. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. But inside, she wasn't sure at all. After Malik went back inside, Angela stood and returned to the field. The unease that had been hovering all morning still clung to her like a shadow. She picked up her shovel and started working again, but her ears were sharper now, listening carefully to every sound around her. Then, not long after, she heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Her body stiffened immediately. Slowly, she turned her head toward the road, and there it was. The same white police cruiser. Her heartbeat quickened as the car pulled up again, stopping in the same place as before. The officer stepped out, his sunglasses catching the sunlight, and walked toward her at a steady pace. Angela wiped her hands on her jeans and took a calming breath. "Back again, officer?" she asked, forcing her voice to sound lighter than she felt. He stopped a few feet away and nodded. "Just following up," he said simply. "About the suspicious activity?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around the field slowly, his gaze resting on the rows of vegetables before returning to her. "Something like that," he replied vaguely. Angela studied him carefully, trying to read his tone, but it gave her nothing. She stood straight, her hands resting lightly on the handle of the shovel, her expression calm but guarded. "Like I said earlier," she reminded him gently, "I've been out here all morning. Nothing unusual has happened." The officer nodded but didn't seem convinced. He looked around again, scanning every inch of the property, his posture tense and deliberate. After a long pause, he spoke again. "You seem prepared," he said, gesturing slightly toward the shovel in her hands. Angela gave a small, polite smile. "Working the field keeps me busy," she said. "And safe, too." Their eyes met briefly, and there was something unreadable in his expression, something she couldn't quite name. Angela shifted slightly, feeling the heat of the sun on her back and the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She knew she needed to stay composed, no matter what. "Officer," she said softly but firmly, "is there something I should know? You've been out here twice today. Is there a reason to be concerned?" He hesitated before answering. "Just making sure everything's fine," he said at last. Angela nodded slowly but didn't relax. Then, in the distance, the wind picked up suddenly, making the trees sway and carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far off. The shadows shifted across the ground, and the world seemed to grow quieter for a moment, as though holding its breath. The officer took one small step closer, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. Angela's hand tightened on the shovel instinctively, though she made sure her face stayed calm. Their gazes locked again, and for a brief second, neither of them moved. It was as if the air between them had thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, he said quietly, "You should always stay alert." Angela's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to nod. "I always am," she replied evenly. For a moment longer, they stood there in silence, and then the officer turned away slowly, walking back toward his cruiser. Angela stayed perfectly still, watching him until the door shut and the car rolled back down the dirt road, disappearing into the distance once again. Only when he was gone did she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. She set the shovel down and wiped her palms against her jeans, feeling the dampness of nervous sweat on her skin. This time, though, the feeling was stronger. Something was building. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but she could feel it deep in her chest, like a quiet warning she couldn't ignore. Angela glanced toward her house again, where her children were safe inside, and her determination hardened. Whatever was happening, she would be ready for it. UAL for cars to pass by occasionally, but this one sounded closer, slower, like someone was driving with caution. A few seconds later, she spotted a white police cruiser coming down the narrow road that ran along the. Angela stood in the middle of her field, her shovel resting loosely in her hands, as the warm summer air wrapped around her. The police officer was still there, just a few steps away, and something about his quiet, watchful presence made the air feel heavier than before. The morning sun had risen higher now, and golden light touched the tops of the tall trees that surrounded her land, but Angela hardly noticed it anymore. Her instincts told her to stay calm, to stay polite, but a small uneasiness had started to creep inside her chest. Something about the officer's silence made her feel as though he wasn't here for a simple check. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" she asked gently, trying to keep her voice steady. The officer tilted his head slightly but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward her house and then back at the field. Finally, he said, "You work out here alone most days?" Angela nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Most of the time it's just me," she replied. "My kids help sometimes when they're not busy with school." He hummed softly, as though making a mental note. "And how long have you been living here?" "Almost 6 years now," Angela said. "Bought the land with my savings and worked hard to turn this place into something I could depend on." She smiled faintly, hoping to make the moment feel lighter, but the officer's expression remained unreadable. There was a pause between them, and in that silence, the world around Angela seemed to grow louder: the soft buzz of cicadas, the distant chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves as a breeze swept through. She tightened her grip on her shovel, though she wasn't sure why. "I see," the officer finally said, his tone calm but firm. Got a call earlier. Someone said they saw unusual movement out here. Angela blinked in surprise. Unusual movement, she repeated softly. That doesn't make sense. I've just been tending to the field since sunrise. He nodded slowly, but his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses kept scanning the area as though searching for something that wasn't there. Angela tried to reason with herself. Maybe he was just following procedure. Maybe someone really had made a wrong call. But no matter how she tried to explain it in her head, something didn't feel right. I haven't seen anyone around, Angela added, trying to sound helpful. It's been quiet all morning. The officer shifted his weight and took a slow step closer. The crunch of his boots against the dry earth made Angela's heart beat faster. Do you know all your neighbors? He asked suddenly. Yes, Angela replied, her voice soft but steady. We look out for each other here. It's a small community. He gave a slight nod but didn't seem satisfied. Angela took a deep breath and tried to stay composed. Her grandmother used to tell her that staying calm in uncertain situations was like holding water in cupped hands, too much shaking, and you'd lose it all. So she steadied herself and spoke again. If you want, I can get my property papers, she offered kindly. I have them inside the house. The officer paused, considering her words, then shook his head slowly. Not yet, he said quietly. For a moment, Angela didn't know what else to say. The sunlight was growing stronger, and she felt a bead of sweat roll down her neck. The warm air clung to her skin, making it harder to breathe comfortably. You live here with your children? The officer asked suddenly. Yes, Angela said, nodding. It's just me and my kids. He tilted his head slightly, as though processing her answer. How old are they? 12 and 8, she replied. Malik and Jasmine. Something about saying their names out loud made her heart tighten. She glanced toward the house, picturing them still asleep inside. The thought of them brought her both comfort and caution. The officer followed her gaze, looking briefly toward the small farmhouse before turning back to her. You've got a nice place here, he said at last. Angela nodded, forcing a small smile. Thank you, she said softly. I've worked hard for it. For the first time since he arrived, there was a flicker of something in his voice, not friendliness exactly, but something less guarded. He glanced at the growing rows of vegetables and said, Looks like you've put in a lot of effort. I have, Angela replied, her voice steadier now. This land, it means everything to me. He didn't answer right away, but his shoulders seemed to relax slightly, just enough for Angela to breathe a little easier. Still, there was a strange tension lingering in the air, like a storm waiting behind the clouds. Angela thought about her grandmother's words again: listen more than you speak when someone's intentions aren't clear. So she stayed quiet for a moment, letting the officer make the next move. After a brief silence, he asked, You ever notice anyone coming around here who doesn't belong? Angela shook her head. Not really, she said honestly. Sometimes hikers pass through, but that's rare. I usually know everyone who comes near my property. The officer nodded thoughtfully, as though filing away her answer in his mind. The two of them stood there, neither speaking for several seconds. The sun had climbed higher now, and the warmth pressed down on them both. Angela could hear the steady rhythm of her own breathing, mixed with the occasional chirp of a cricket somewhere in the grass. Finally, she broke the silence. Officer, she said carefully, I don't mean any disrespect, but, should I be worried about something? You keep looking around like there's trouble. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for the first time. For a moment, his expression softened, and he said, No need to worry yet. Just routine work. Angela nodded, though her instincts told her there was more to it than that. A few seconds later, she heard a faint sound behind her, the creak of her screen door opening. She turned her head quickly and saw Malik standing on the porch, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mom," he called softly. "Who's that?" Angela forced a gentle smile. "It's all right, baby," she said, waving him back inside. "Go get your sister and have some breakfast." Malik hesitated for a moment but nodded and disappeared into the house. When she turned back, the officer was watching the house carefully. Angela's grip tightened slightly on the shovel, though she kept her voice calm. "They're just kids," she said softly. "I don't want them to worry." The officer gave a small nod. "Of course," he said quietly. Another silence settled between them, heavier this time. Angela felt her heartbeat pick up again, though she did her best not to show it. Finally, the officer stepped back slightly, glancing one last time at the field before turning toward his cruiser. "I'll be around," he said simply, opening the car door. Angela stood where she was, watching as the vehicle started slowly down the dirt road. The sound of the engine faded into the distance until it disappeared completely, leaving only the soft hum of summer in the air. She exhaled deeply, realizing she had been holding her breath without noticing. Something about the encounter stayed with her. It wasn't what he said that unsettled her, it was what he didn't say. Angela turned back to her field, trying to shake off the strange tension, but her mind kept returning to the officer's searching eyes and the way he'd studied every corner of her land. She knelt down to pull a few weeds from the soil, forcing herself to focus on her work, but she couldn't ignore the quiet unease that lingered in her chest. The day had started peacefully, but now, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, the air felt heavier, and the silence around her carried a new weight. Somewhere deep down, Angela knew this wasn't the end of the encounter, it was only the beginning. Edge of her property. She frowned slightly, resting her shovel against the ground. Strange, she whispered to herself. There wasn't much traffic out here, and police cars rarely showed up unless something serious had happened. The car rolled to a stop just a few feet away from where her field ended. Angela watched as the driver's door opened and a uniformed officer stepped out. The sun reflected off his sunglasses as he walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. Angela straightened her back and waited quietly, trying to read his expression, but his face was hidden by the shadow of his hat. She felt her heartbeat pick up just a little, though she didn't know why. "Morning," she said politely, offering a small smile. "Can I help you with something?" The officer didn't smile back. He paused for a moment, looking around the field before finally turning his attention to her. "You live here?" he asked, his tone flat. "Yes, sir," Angela replied, nodding. "This is my land. Been working here for years." He glanced at the field again, then at the house behind her, as though studying every detail. Angela shifted her weight uncomfortably, but she kept her voice calm. "Something wrong?" she asked carefully. Instead of answering right away, he walked a few steps closer, stopping just inside the boundary of her property. His boots left prints in the soft dirt. Angela tightened her grip on the shovel without realizing it. The silence stretched for a moment, broken only by the sound of birds overhead and the distant hum of cicadas in the trees. Finally, he spoke again. "Got a report about some suspicious activity out here," he said slowly. "Thought I'd check it out." Angela blinked, surprised. "Suspicious activity? Out here? I've just been working in my garden since sunrise." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the field again, his eyes sharp, as though searching for something hidden. Angela felt a twinge of unease ripple through her chest. "I can show you the property papers if you need proof," she offered gently, trying to ease the tension. "This is my home." For a moment, their eyes met, and she thought she saw something flicker behind his sunglasses, something unreadable. He nodded slightly, though his expression remained hard to read. "No need for that right now," he said, taking another step forward. Just doing my job. Angela nodded but stayed where she was, keeping a careful distance. Something about his presence unsettled her, though she couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the silence, or the way he kept looking around as though expecting to find something wrong. She thought about her children inside the house and felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. The officer glanced down at the shovel in her hands. "You working alone?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "Just me out here." He hummed quietly, like he was thinking about something. Then he gestured vaguely toward the field. "You spend a lot of time out here." Angela gave a small smile. "Every day," she said softly. "This is my work. It's how I provide for my family." For a moment, there was silence again. A warm breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers from the edge of the property. The sunlight had grown stronger now, casting long shadows over the rows of vegetables. Angela tried to relax, telling herself it was just a routine visit, nothing more. But deep down, something about the situation felt off. The officer took another slow step forward, close enough now that she could see the tiny beads of sweat forming along his jawline. He stood still, his hand resting on his belt, and studied her carefully. Angela swallowed, trying to ignore the tension building in the air. "If you'd like," she said softly, "I can give you some water. It's getting hot already." He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I'm fine," he said shortly. Angela nodded, keeping her eyes on him, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the shovel handle. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint laughter of children, probably her neighbor's kids playing near the creek, and for just a second, the sound brought her comfort. But her gaze remained fixed on